Things continue to get worse for Marvel, and is that a surprise? Absolutely not. And with Ant-Man 3's terrible performance at the box office, being one of Marvel's worst MCU box office drops ever, being close to 70%, most likely going to be Marvel's first ever box office flop, having the film needing to make up to $600 million just to break even. And with that flop of Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantemania, we are now having Bob Iger himself cutting back on Marvel films. That is exactly what happens when you don't learn and understand what made phases 1 through 3 so great. Instead of following that success path, you decide to get woke and completely change up everything. Phase 4, you had a shift of the MCU movement, focusing on identity politics and characters that hardly no one is interested in. And with that move, Marvel, you have split the fan base in half. You had a winning formula and just crapped all over it. And that's why no one is surprised when you continue to see all these trailers continue to get ratioed and disliked by many. For sake, someone over at Marvel thought it was a good idea to make Empower a series on Disney Plus. What the actual hell? Then you'll have the defenders that defend Marvel for being so brave, and yet it seems that none of them watch any of the content. Just look at Miss Marvel. It was the lowest watched MCU show on Disney Plus. That should say a lot. And Disney seems to be starting to wake up to all this nonsense with what they've been doing to, at least when it comes to Marvel. You still have the Disney side of things with Peter Pan and Wendy and the Little Mermaid continue to add on to that identity politics bandwagon. And if anything, this is going to piss off investors even more. You had Nelson Peltz, an activist investor, call out Disney to change itself into what made it great in the first place, as we get into the article. The Walt Disney Company CEO Bob Iger signaled that the company plans on cutting back on the Marvel franchise films in the wake of Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania performing abysmally in the box office. This is what happens when you produce crappy quality content. You are forced to cut back on producing it. And if it were the opposite in having Marvel actually produce great content, people would eat it up and want more. But that is just not the case. Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania has only grossed $198.1 million domestically and another $249.2 million internationally for a global gross of $447.3 million. The film is unlikely to surpass the box office grosses of Ant-Man and the Wasp, which grossed $216.6 million domestically and $406.4 million internationally for a global gross of $623.1 million. Note, these numbers are not adjusted for inflation. You also have to factor in that ticket prices are higher than they were before the pandemic, and also the budget is $70 million more than the previous two Ant-Man movies, meaning that there are less people going out to see these movies, even though the numbers may appear to be great when that's not the case, as this movie is to more than likely do less in revenue than its previous two movies. And even having more of a budget, it still seems to not even help when it comes to the quality of the movie, as the CGI is still awful, which you'd expect with more money going into the movie, the better quality it would have, which isn't the case. The film might even struggle to surpass the unadjusted box office grosses for the first Ant-Man. That film grossed $180.2 million domestically and $338.6 million internationally for a global gross of $518.8 million. And you also can't forget that this is most likely going to be a flop and a loss, which is something you wouldn't expect, especially coming from an Ant-Man movie, as the character has been in other major movies such as Endgame and Captain America Civil War. During an appearance at a Morgan Stanley conference, the Hollywood Reporter's Alex Weprin reported Iger signaled the company plans on cutting back on how many films they make around certain characters. Iger said, "What we have to look at Marvel is not necessarily the volume of Marvel storytelling, but how many times we go back to the well on certain characters." Volume does play a key aspect in it. The more is produced, the less quality the movie has, because you are spread thin and can't focus on one thing at a time. Just look at the earlier phases of Phase 1 and 2 in Marvel, which I believe had only 6 movies each, and that's it. Now fast forward to Phase 4 and 5, it's double that, and on top of all that, you have to add in the shows, of course. You are spreading yourself thin. He elaborated, sequels typically work well for us, but do you need a third or a fourth, for instance, or is it time to turn to other characters? There's nothing in any way inherently off in terms of the Marvel brand. I think we just have to look at what characters and stories we are mining. Exactly, Phase 4, we started seeing characters that many people weren't interested in, and having the flagship of beloved characters taking a step back and relaxing, which wasn't the case with Phases 1 through 3. Besides Thor and Hulk, which they absolutely defiled their characters in Phase 4, in my opinion. Iger then declared, and if you look at the trajectory of Marvel over the next 5 years, you'll see a lot of newness. Hopefully it is good newness, but most likely it won't be. He added, now we're going to turn back to the Avengers franchise, but with a whole set of different Avengers as an example. What worries me? with that as well is that we had Kevin Feige years ago saying that Marvel is going to have more female heroes than males. And well, most of those characters many people aren't interested in the slightest. And it also doesn't help when you have Captain Marvel and Miss Marvel being pushed into major roles of the franchise, which both of those characters haven't been well received. Not only did Iger detail that there might not be as many Marvel franchise films in the works, but he indicated that the company at large has a quality problem. It feels that he's finding all this out for the first time. Many people have been talking about this for a while now, especially when it comes to CGI, which has been terrible throughout all of Phase 4, and already kicking off Phase 5 with even more terrible CGI. And that's what happens when VFX artists are overworked and underpaid. That is just what happens. We don't give enough time and money to that department in which they make the MCU come to life. He said, there's so much consumer choice right now, and it comes back to what is differentiated. That's one thing, obviously, we have talked about. It's those brands, Star Wars, Marvel, and Disney and Pixar, for instance. But quality is also a differentiator. And if you take a look at all those brands and companies, they have all gone down the fucking gutter. Star Wars is not what it used to be, same as with Marvel. With Pixar, once John Lasseter left the company, it has also gone down the drain. And Disney being the foundation of all of this with their continued agendas and identity politics that they keep pushing, rather than focusing on entertainment, which should be a priority. And I truly don't think nothing will change. Disney is still a cash cow when it comes to their theme parks, so them losing some money on their movies won't really do anything to them, as the message is much more important to them rather than the loss in money or entertainment and creativity, as they have created nothing new but continue to change well-established characters and franchises into something completely different. And with all of that in mind, I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye-bye.